you nervous right now?
Yeah. No, I'm a nervous type person also. So let's just go. Let's do it. I didn't think anybody would ever get around to finding out what really happened, that there was really such evil in one family. I loved my brother. I really loved him. But that we didn't see what we should have saw. When you look at somebody, look them in the eyes. If you look in somebody's eyes and it look like they got a demon there, they got one.
Why were you concerned to do this?
My sister wanted to do it, and I don't know, she said it was time, and I just said, okay, y'all. Well, if you're gonna tell your side, I want to tell mine too, so. Her pain was so deep that she buried it for many, many years. I hope that by telling this story, that it has helped her to get some of her pain out. Somebody we ought to have seen the red flag, you know. We should have seen that something wasn't quite right here. You know, we knew it wasn't quite right, but we didn't deal with it the way we should have. We loved him. He was not always the evil person that they saw. He was a good person most of the time. But you could always tell that there was something wrong. That's the little boy in Johnny. That's the little boy I miss. This is also him with the cowlick. Never could tame that cowlick. Yeah, he was a happy little boy then. He was always laughing. Except when Daddy was home. Dad was evil, very evil.
You've been drinking again, haven't you?
Don't worry about
I can tell. You've been drinking again.
One day, he came home, and he knew Mama had some money, which she had for the winter. And he come home, drunk, and she wouldn't give him the money.
It's my money.
Damn it.
I decide what goes on in this house with the money. It's my money.
I gotta take care of them.
They're my kids, too.
And he pulled a shotgun on her, and he told her he's gonna blow her brains out.
Put that look on the kitchen.
You said you wanted to see Mad. You want to see Mad?
I'm sorry. I'll give you whatever you want.
You're going to give me the money.
And I grabbed Johnny because I was afraid that he was gonna shoot Mama in the head.
Put the gun down.
Well, I didn't know what was gonna happen. I will never forget that, and I never forgave my daddy for that. I did not want my brother to grow up like my father.
Just get me what I want.
My sister Diane and Johnny had been building something, and he laid the hammer down. Diane had been picking on Johnny all day long, but he had had enough, and he got mad. That boy, when you made him mad, he was mad. He took the hammer and bang, tapped her in the head with it. Diane went down. That was my first memory of anything. He could have killed her.
Hey, can I have a piece of candy?
He had some candy. I wanted one.
Please?
And I asked him, he said, no, I couldn't have it. No, he said, you're not getting any. And I just kept bugging him about it. And he finally gave it to me. By the time I went and put it in my mouth, he hit me on the leg real hard. And I went, and got choked. And I couldn't breathe. It had no effect on him, not that I could see. He just smiled and laughed at us. It scared me. Later, I asked him, what made you do that? He said, I've had demons since I was a little boy, 4 years old. He had demons in his mind, he said.
Why would you do that?
It did no good to spank him, because he got to where he enjoyed being spanked. I've never seen anybody like to get whipped, but he did. Johnny did not feel pain, and he would tell you, I do not feel pain. And Johnny thought that everybody felt that way. And that, to me, that's just not normal. And then, you know, it just escalated. Johnny was raised to be evil by a father that wanted him to be evil. He was made to do things and see things that no young child should ever be made to see.
Hey.
Betty went to all the local whores, and one of them was like 64 years old. And he took Johnny with him. Johnny's 14 years old. And he made Johnny have sex with that woman. Forced him to have sex with that woman. He told him he was trying to make him into a man. Daddy told him if he didn't, he was gonna beat him. And he did. Crying the whole time. When Johnny told me that story, I cried like a baby. Johnny had never been with a girl. Didn't even know what sex was. Johnny he was different after that. He was totally different. Johnny went up there as a young kid, came back as a very angry man. Yeah, it is hard for me to look at this picture. I've not seen this picture in a long time. He's not happy here. It's when he started really having troubles. He talked about seeing dead people.
No!
He would get up. I dreamed I seen somebody dead, and he was talking about people that were still alive. It was weird. Johnny thought that he was psychic at one time, and he thought he was seeing people that were going to die. People in my dreams. They're all going to die. Mama told me, Johnny, you're not psychic. Nobody's going to die. But Mama thought it was a little demon. She said, look at that. He looks like he got a demon in his eyes. And it's hard to get rid of the demon. In my heart, I knew that something was fixing to be terribly wrong and that something was fixing to happen, but I didn't know what.
Why couldn't I protect him from the person he became? I didn't know how bad it was until right before it was all said and done. I couldn't protect him. And that makes me sad.
What? Are you sure?
Mama was on the phone with my sister Wanda this year, had called and didn't know what to do.
Well, how did they know it was even him?
This year had caught Johnny peeping in women's windows.
I will talk to him. I'll talk to him right now. You never do anything like that again.
I asked him. I said, what is this, you know?
Johnny, is it true?
Are you looking in girls' windows? He said, oh, they lied. That ain't true.
It wasn't me.
Got nothing to say about that. He said, I ain't done nothing wrong. And that was it.
Johnny, don't lie to me.
I'm not lying.
In my mind, I knew that was true. And he was lying to me. He just bald-faced lied to me. But he didn't want to talk about it.
We was living in Texas. The police came by. They told Mama that they had caught Johnny peeping in the window, and he was peeping in at his little girlfriend's house. The funny thing was, it wasn't his girlfriend. He just called her that. He didn't even know the girl. He was just watching her, and had been for several weeks. He said, it's fun. All he ever said, it's fun. He liked doing it for the thrill of it. That wasn't the first time. That's just the time he got caught.
And it wasn't talked about in my house, what he had done. And they kept it hush-hush. It should have been dealt with differently. But who's to say? I don't know if that would have changed anything or not.
He wanted to get in these girls' heads. He wanted to do things to them, but he didn't know quite how to do it. But he was trying to learn, and he couldn't stop. As the years was going by, it started really getting bad. He was going inside people's houses. He went in their room and stood over their bed for 45 minutes while they slept and just watched them. Just stood there and watched them sleep. What pleasure does that give you? Why would you want to stand over somebody's bed and look at them? But to him, it was a thrill. It's like he wanted to play games with other people's lives. I think Johnny knew that he was fixing to do something that was really bad.
We was all at Betty's when the police came.
There was a bang at the door, and I jumped up, and I answered the door, and there's cops, and they were looking for Johnny.
Betty, is your brother Johnny home?
And I want to know why. And they wouldn't tell me.
Just get your brother for us.
Turned around, went to the bedroom and got Johnny. And they immediately arrested him and took him. You know, I was in a panic. It was pure panic. This girl was the daughter of the mayor. He had broken her house, and she caught him standing over her bed. She woke up, and he attempted to rape her. And it didn't work. She started screaming and hollering and fighting, and he run.
I couldn't never bring myself to ask him. I don't know why, I just couldn't. Maybe I was afraid that he'd tell me the truth. I don't know. But I just didn't ask that question.
You got something to say? Something you want to ask?
In my mind, I knew he'd done it, but I didn't want to hear it come out of his mouth. I didn't want to hear him say that he was capable of something like that.
If you could do me a favor and, make sure Mama doesn't come down here.
Mama put the blinders on, as we'd say, put the blinders on. Didn't believe it. She denied it for years. When he come home that year, he wasn't my brother. I mean, I could see in his eyes. I was wondering where my brother went. Where did he go, you know?
And it was that look, that evil look, the one that he get when he was really, really mad. It was like evil. We were in a bar, and I was sitting at a table with one of my girlfriends, and this guy had said something to Johnny.
No, watch where you're going.
Johnny got very mad, and this guy had turned his back, and Johnny pulled out a knife and put it to that guy's throat.
You have to watch out, my man. You should be watching out, my man.
I thought he was going to kill him.
Johnny, stop it!
We were in a bar, and this guy had said something to Johnny.
No, watch where you're going. Jeez. What did you just say?
And Johnny pulled out a knife and put it to that guy's throat. I thought he was going to kill him. Right there.
I'm dead to me again. Say it to me again. Watch it. Say it again. Say it again.
All of a sudden, it was like the devil himself was in that boy. It would be like his eyes turned red, and he was crazy. He was somewhere else. He was not there. But it was a demon in his soul. If there ever was a demon in somebody, it was in his soul at that moment.
Say it again, all right?
Johnny, stop
Say
it!
again.
Johnny, look at me. Don't do something dumb.
I got up and went to Johnny, and if I hadn't, he would have probably killed that man.
Put the knife down. Come on.
Johnny told me that he'd choked his girlfriend. He said he choked her. Said he had his hands around her neck. Would killed her for no reason except that she was there. And he said he just let go. He convinced her that she had a nightmare or something, and she choked herself in her sleep. What would make him go into that kind of a rage is what's going through my head. What pushed him that far? He wouldn't talk about it. And he said, it's none of your business. Leave it alone. And that's what you left, God left it alone. She was lucky to live. She was lucky to come back. She was one of the lucky ones.
He couldn't control himself. It was like he would lose control of his actions. He didn't know how to stop.
I let him come and live with me. And I got him a job, and even the people we worked with liked him. He was real respectful. Yes, ma'am, no, ma'am.
He knew how to put the charm on. And if Johnny wanted you to like him, he could make you like him. Everything looked like it was going to be okay. And then it wasn't.
We got up to go to work one morning, just a regular morning. Somebody said, did you see that flyer out there on the window? Your neighbor's missing. I said, what? He said, yeah, Patricia Stewart. I said, well, no, I haven't heard nothing about it. I hope she knows she's okay. And I went on to work. Didn't think nothing about it.
Morning.
Hey.
We got up to go to work. I said, what happened to your pants, Johnny?
What's that on your pants?
I noticed a little spot on one side of the knee. He said, oh, I was working on my old car and got some transmission fluid on. Kind of made me a little weird, you know. What happened there? What's going on? I knew something deep down in my heart that something wasn't right. I can't honestly say that it didn't go through my mind. I'm not gonna lie. I thought, oh God, Johnny, what have you done? And I asked him, Johnny, what's going on? Oh, nothing. Nothing's going on. Everything's good. I said, everything's not good. My neighbor's missing. He won't say nothing. Won't say nothing. Hope she's all right. Looked at me and they said, well, you might as well admit it. We know you killed her. Your brother told us that you done it.
What's that on your pants?
I was working on the car.
I'm getting scared. I'm kind of getting scared here, you know? I've seen the pants, the girl's gone. Nobody can find her. I thought, oh God, Johnny, what have you done?
What do you think he might have been doing?
I think he had killed her. A few days go by, and God bless her family because they had reported her missing, obviously, and put their flyers out, missing, and they're the one that got the SBI involved. We opened the door, and the SBI agent and a local county cop was there and asked us to come over to the police station to answer a few questions about the disappearance of Patricia.
Can you describe your relationship with your neighbor?
She's my neighbor.
They asked me, did I hear anything? Did I see anything unusual? And I said, no. They said, well, maybe you heard something, you just don't realize it. And I said, no, sir, I don't think I heard anything.
You must know something, Layla. You must have seen something.
I don't know.
They looked at me and they said, well, you might as well admit it. We know you killed her. Your brother told us that you done it.
You're looking at going away for a long time.
No. I said, what did you just say to me? He said, we know you killed her. Why don't you just tell us what dumpster you threw her in? And they say there was other things in there, like zip ties and stuff that was in the trunk. And that's when I actually knew. That's when it really hit home that my brother had killed her and put her in the trunk of my car. There was evidence, it was there. It was her blood. They had done tested it. It was her.
Johnny, you have to tell him that I'm not involved. Do you hear me? Please.
I said, Johnny, please. I said, they're threatening me with life in prison. Please tell him. He said, I ain't got nothing to say. He said, I have nothing to say to you. I have nothing to say to them. And he won't tell. Mama, you couldn't lie to Mama. If we get Mama here, he'll tell her the truth. So he can never lie to her.
Johnny's the #1 suspect in a murder case we're investigating right now.
Those two detectives showed up at Mama's door looking for Mama. They said, we are investigating the murder of Patricia Stewart in Robbinsville, North Carolina.
He's investigating right now.
And I knew right then Johnny had done killed somebody. And Mama was white as a sheet. She knew too. He said, I want you to come to Robbinsville with me to talk to your son. He will not tell us where Patricia's body is. Mama told them, she said, if my son has killed somebody, I will find it.
Mama goes in. Big tears just come to his eyes. She said,
Hi, baby.
she said, son, what's going on? He just cried. He just went crying whenever he seen her. And he said, Mama, it's awful. It's bad, Mama. It's really bad. She said, you can just tell me. Just tell me. There for a long time, he wouldn't say nothing. He said, you just sit there. Say, Mama, it's bad.
Whatever it is, it's all right. You know, there's nothing you could do that would make me stop loving you.
And she finally told me, son, you can't live with this. You've got to tell me. We can get through this if you'll just tell me. I love you, son. No matter what, you're my son, and I love you. And he told him.
Thank you so much again for coming over.
Oh, yeah, it was so much fun.
He was in that apartment when she come home. Because she had a friend with her. But he was in the closet, watching them. And he said if that girl hadn't left, she would have died too. He said that he come out of the closet on her. He hit her in the head with a knife, he said. It wasn't enough to kill her, but she was unconscious. He hit her with such force it cracked her skull. He strangled her after that when he seen that she was still alive. Choked her until she didn't move anymore. He said he panicked, but I don't believe he did. He meant to kill her. Put her in the trunk of my car and took her to Grandma's. He set her on fire. And so he seen headlights. Threw some dirt on her, put her out and left. But what he put her family through, what he put her through, she had to be so terrified. And so scared that night for somebody to be in your house. And that's my brother. You know, that's my brother. Yeah, it haunts me. Yeah, it does. It does. It was bad. I don't wish it on anybody. It's the worst nightmare I've never wake up from. I think there was a lot more.
Johnny would just go out there and just turn all that evil loose on unsuspected, innocent people. And heaven help those people. I want it all to be different. I would love to change the end of the story, but I can't.
This is Patricia. She was pretty. She's very pretty. She didn't deserve what he done to her. It's unimaginable what she went through because of my brother.
I didn't do anything, but I was blamed for it. Just because I was his sister. We were guilty by association.
We live in a very rural community, and it was always thought that I was involved because he lived with me, and, you know, she was my neighbor. I could hear people whispering, you know, saying this is John Rose's sister.
Layla was so upset because they thought she had something to do with it. They just about tormented that girl to death. And in the end, they found out that she did not have nothing to do with it. But she was so devastated. Okay, if this happened, how many more happened? Because of all the other times that I wondered over the years about what he'd been doing. I think there was more. I think Patricia was Johnny's last victim. I think there are more across the country when he was driving a truck.
I believe he did. He said he killed 204 people. 204 people he killed. That's what he said.
There was one story he told Mama. He talked about picking a girl up, and it was in Arizona, in a truck stop. And he carried this girl for 3 days through the desert. And he dropped her off in the middle of the desert, and this girl was dead. And he may have just been running his mouth. But the way he said those things, the way he talked, it make your skin crawl. You see the eyes? You see the demon in him. He's in another place. I know he's in prison here, so I don't see Johnny there. I don't know who he is. Oh, my goodness.
That was the picture, the last interview that he gave. And he spoke to a reporter.
This was right before he was executed. I'm just going to give you this back. I don't even want to look at that. That is awful. That gives me chills all the way up and down my body.
She said they won't be able to kill him in front of his mother. I said, Mama, they're going to kill him. They're going to kill him in front of you, Mama. Couldn't wrap her mind around them killing him in front of her.
We were downstairs waiting. That's where Mom told us to wait. We prayed for Johnny's soul because we weren't sure where Johnny was going. Oh, I knew the minute he died. Me and Lola were holding hands, and Lola gasped. And I looked at her and I said, he's gone, ain't he? Lola let him leave.
Mama's coming down the stairs, and I'm looking at her, you know, and she just smiles at me. She just smiles and says, it's over. I knew right then my mama would be okay.
Me and Lola, we've got real close in the last 5 years. There ain't nobody left but me and her. She's my rock right now. I love her. I do. I believe that Yolanda's going to be okay now because she released some of the pain that she felt from what Johnny did because he was eating her alive. And now it's not anymore. And she feels so much lighter. She feels so much better, and I'm so proud.
I love him, but I really love him. I miss him. I guess I always would. He was my best friend. He taught me that you never know him.
They say every highway holds a secret, but the one slicing through northern Florida carries something darker, something that hums beneath the asphalt like a tremor waiting to break the surface. It begins on a night no one remembers on purpose, a night swallowed by humidity and the low electric buzz of cicadas. A night where one car pulled over onto the shoulder for reasons no investigator, no witness, no stray driver has ever been able to explain. What happened in those minutes, those disappearing, unaccounted for minutes, still stains the map like a bruise. And decades later, a single fingerprint, buried where no one ever thought to look, is about to rip open everything people thought they understood about the Florida highway cold case. The moment dispatch logged the call, it sounded routine: abandoned vehicle southbound, mile marker 214. Highway patrol moved slow because abandoned cars out here were like palmetto bushes everywhere, half wilted, half forgotten. But this one wasn't like the others. The sedan sat too neatly aligned to the guardrail. Headlights still shining into the empty black. Engine cool, but not cold. Driver's door shut. Passenger window half open, as if someone had hesitated, just a second, before leaving it behind forever. There were no signs of struggle. No belongings scattered. No skid marks. No blood. Just a car pointed south, humming with the residue of the last person who touched it, a person who simply stopped existing on the edge of the highway. Inside, everything was undisturbed. Wallet on the seat. A half-finished bottle of water. A torn highway map folded too many times. And on the dashboard, a single receipt from a gas station 30 miles north. Timestamped 10:43 p.m. The employee working that night claimed the driver, male, early 30s, traveling alone, said nothing, bought gas, paid cash, and left. No agitation. No fear. No sense he was slipping toward the edge of his own disappearance. But the car told a different story. Because the keys were still in the ignition. And people running away don't usually leave their keys behind unless they expect to come back, unless something stops them before they can. The investigation opened like thousands before it, methodical, procedural, predictable. A missing persons alert. A canvas of the area. Search dogs sweeping the brush lining the highway. Helicopters overhead scanning for movement. Nothing. For weeks the investigators combed through palmettos, swamps, dirt roads that dead-ended into nothing. They found footprints that could have belonged to anyone. Beer cans rusting into the soil. Old fire pits. Tire tracks leading in circles. But not the driver. Not a shred of him. The ground seemed to swallow any clue the moment it appeared, leaving only the abandoned car as a mocking reminder that the last known moment of his life was frozen, a still frame with no next scene. Locals whispered about it for months. Some said the highway had taken him, as if the road itself were alive. Others claimed he must have willingly vanished, walked out under the moonlight into the swamp, and let it consume him. But those weren't theories, just fear dressed as folklore. None of them matched the neatness of the vehicle, the calmness of the scene, the eerie stillness of the car that looked staged, as though someone had placed it there intentionally. Even the lead investigator, a man who didn't believe in mystery, wrote one quiet note in the margins of his report: "Feels too clean." Time marched forward, sluggish at first, then faster as the case slid into the back drawer of the sheriff's office. Evidence sealed. Witness reports archived. Photos fading in their plastic sleeves. The highway saw thousands of new cars, new faces, new stories that mattered more than an unsolved disappearance from a decade, then 2 decades, then 3. New officers arrived who had never heard of the case. Retirement swept away the old names, the ones who had walked the brush line searching for a man who had long stopped being a person and had become a ghost. Still, every few years, someone called in a tip. A skeleton found in a field, never him. A man in another state claiming to be the missing driver, never verified. A jailhouse confession that dissolved under questioning. Hope flickered like a match, bright for a second, then died. And so the Florida highway cold case settled into its role, a file gathering dust, a memory locals discussed only when the night felt too quiet. But the silence surrounding the case wasn't empty. It was waiting. The reopening didn't start with a revelation. It started with a broken air conditioner in an evidence storage room almost 4 decades later. When the maintenance crew moved boxes to repair the unit, one crate slipped, cracked open on the floor, and an envelope slid out. Inside, wrapped in plastic, was a small fragment of the car's passenger window, collected the night of the disappearance, catalogued, then accidentally set aside and forgotten. A fragment no one had examined closely because the case hadn't seemed like one involving a break-in or a struggle. The detective now assigned to cold cases, someone who wasn't even alive when the original investigation began, decided to test it anyway. Routine, he called it. Due diligence. Laboratories had changed. Technology had teeth now, sharp ones. Under the glass, illuminated by a narrow beam of light, was the faint trace of a fingerprint. Too partial to read back then, but now it had shape. Curves. Ridges. A pattern emerging from the glass like a secret rising from the grave. The technician scanned it, expecting nothing. Another dead end. Another sample too degraded to matter. But the system didn't reject it. It hesitated. Processed. Matched. And suddenly the screen flashed a name, a real name, tied to a real person who had never once appeared in the original case file. Someone who had been alive at the time. Someone with no reason to have touched the car of a man who vanished without a trace. Someone whose record showed no connection, not even a distant one, to the missing driver. And more disturbing than that, someone who had died years ago, long before anyone realized their fingerprint had been waiting on that forgotten shard of glass. This wasn't a lead. It was a shockwave. The detective stared at the match, feeling the kind of cold that doesn't come from a draft, but from the knowledge that a supposedly quiet, closed-off story had just turned violent again. He ordered every piece of evidence pulled from storage. Every photo digitized. Every scrap of the original vehicle re-examined. And what they found was not a case frozen in time, but a case deliberately choked, strangled by assumptions made decades earlier, assumptions now collapsing under the weight of the fingerprint that should not exist. Because the man whose fingerprint appeared on that glass had been arrested once for trespassing near a construction site, but had no history of violence. No connection to Florida's highways. No link to the missing driver's route. And yet, there his fingerprint was, pressed into the interior of a car he supposedly never touched, on a night he had no known reason to be anywhere nearby. The detective called in his supervisor. They reviewed the old maps, the gas station receipt, the timeline, and an uneasy thought crept through the room. If this print belonged to the wrong man, what else about the scene had been misread? What if the car wasn't abandoned at random? What if the driver didn't leave voluntarily? What if someone else placed the car there after the fact, wiping clean the tracks of whatever had happened elsewhere? Suddenly, the case was no longer a disappearance, it was a relocation. A stage. A setup. That realization snapped through the department like a live wire. Reporters smelled the shift. The public sensed something waking beneath the surface. What had once been a quiet mystery became a headline again. Florida highway cold case reopened. Single fingerprint changes everything. And just like that, the disappearance was no longer something sealed by time. It was a living, breathing question clawing its way back into the present. Witnesses long silent stepped forward again. People who had driven the highway that night remembered things they hadn't thought mattered, strange shapes on the shoulder, a second car parked further down, a shadow moving toward the tree line. Small details, meaningless at the time, but now trembling with importance. The detective collected them all, building a new map of that night, one made not from the calmness of the scene, but from the chaos hiding underneath it. And as the pieces shifted, a darker possibility crystallized, one the old investigators had never considered, one that reframed everything. If the fingerprint didn't belong to the driver, then the last person inside that vehicle wasn't the victim. It was the perpetrator. And that perpetrator had left behind only one trace, one careless touch, before vanishing just as completely as the man he took. The case wasn't dead. It had never been dead. It had simply been waiting for someone to notice the one truth buried inside the smallest piece of forgotten glass, that the night on the Florida highway was not an ending. It was the beginning of something far worse. The discovery of that single fingerprint didn't just reopen the case, it detonated it. The detective felt it in the way phones started ringing before sunrise, in the way supervisors began hovering in doorways pretending not to hover, in the way the evidence room suddenly felt too small for the weight of what had been missed for nearly 4 decades. A fingerprint belonging to a man with no reason to be there, no connection to the victim, no timeline placing him anywhere near the highway. A man dead for years. A man whose only trace in the story was a ridge pattern sealed in glass. There was a question no one wanted to say out loud, but it hung in the room like smoke. How many people knew this fingerprint existed? The detective reviewed the original inventory sheets. Every item was listed except for the fragment of glass. Not missing, not relocated, simply absent, as if it had never been collected. But someone had placed it into an evidence envelope. Someone had slipped it into that storage crate. Someone had ensured it remained out of sight long enough for everyone involved to retire, relocate, or die. Was it an oversight? Or a deliberate erasure? The detective couldn't decide which possibility was worse. He drove the 2-hour stretch north to the gas station on the receipt. The building had changed owners half a dozen times, its fluorescent lights swapped out, its aisles rearranged, its past almost erased. But the concrete was the same. The structure was the same. The parking lot where the missing driver had fueled up still sloped at that slight angle, the one that made rainwater glide toward the curb. The detective walked around it slowly, imagining that night decades ago, the driver reaching for the pump handle, unaware he was being watched, or tracked, or chosen. The current owner, a woman with sharp eyes and a quiet voice, admitted she had heard the story growing up. Everyone had. A man buys gas, drives south, stops existing. Kids dared each other to walk the stretch of road at night. Teenagers made up ghost stories. But the truth that the case had just been reopened spread through her far quicker than rumors ever could. She frowned as the detective showed her a picture of the missing driver, aged back to the night he disappeared. She shook her head. Too long ago. Too many faces. But when he showed her the fingerprint match, the name attached to it, something flickered. A faint recognition, like remembering a song without remembering the lyrics. He used to stop here, she said softly. Not often. But I'd seen him before when I was younger. The detective's pulse spiked. When? Early 90s. My dad ran the store back then. That man came through every few months. Quiet type. Didn't talk much. Did he ever come in with anyone? Argue with anyone? Cause trouble? No, she said. But he watched people. That's what my dad used to say. He was a watcher. That word sat cold in the detective's stomach. Watcher. Not participant, not bystander, someone who observed the routines of strangers. Someone who learned patterns. Someone who could follow a man 30 miles to a highway shoulder without ever being noticed. But the fingerprint match alone wasn't enough to prove anything beyond presence. And presence without context was nothing but smoke. The detective traced the matched man's life, a small, unremarkable existence on the outskirts of Jacksonville. Odd jobs. Frequent moves. No wife, no children. One trespassing charge. A long employment file at a construction company that built rest stops along several Florida highways, including the stretch where the abandoned car had been found. He had worked right there. Hammering, lifting, hauling concrete. Day after day, week after week. He knew the land, the brush, the paths that dipped behind the guardrail into cover. He knew where headlights could and couldn't be seen. He knew how to approach a parked car without leaving footprints in the mud. And yet he was dead before his fingerprint resurfaced, beyond interrogation, beyond confession. The detective drove to the cemetery where he was buried, a modest plot beneath a leaning oak. The man's life ended quietly, no obituary, no visitors. The detective knelt beside the headstone, feeling the humidity press against his skin. What connection had existed between this silent man and the missing driver? Why had their paths crossed at all, let alone on the last night of the driver's life? The supervisor demanded media silence, but that was impossible. Reporters swarmed like heat waves off asphalt, hungry for angles, for speculation, for the thrill of resurrected mystery. The detective avoided them, focusing instead on reconstructing the timeline. If the fingerprint came from inside the car, the man must have been there after the driver had been at the gas station. But the station's security cameras from that era had been overwritten millions of times since. The last known hour of the driver's life still dangled untouchable, a string leading nowhere. The detective examined the original car photos again. Something bothered him, the passenger window. It was rolled down halfway. Too specific to be random. Too deliberate to ignore. Why halfway? Why not fully open? Why open at all? The detective imagined a conversation, a stranger approaching, the driver rolling down the window just enough to hear, not enough to feel unsafe. A question asked. Directions, perhaps. Assistance. Or maybe a lure, an excuse to get close. A press of fingers against the glass. A push. A struggle hidden by darkness. The detective ordered the car itself to be re-examined. It had been preserved, but never thoroughly reprocessed with modern tools. Under new light, new chemicals, new technology, faint smudges glowed on the seatbelt buckle, a second fingerprint. Different from the first. Too faded to match, but human. And on the carpet beneath the passenger seat, a small dark fiber, synthetic, the kind used in industrial gloves. Suddenly, the cleanliness of the scene felt intentional, controlled. As though someone had wiped almost everything except what could not be reached without dismantling the car. The detective's breath tightened as a new theory took shape, a theory not of one perpetrator, but two. One who left the fingerprint on the glass. Another inside the car, unseen, unnoticed until now. A second figure who had never appeared in the original investigation because investigators had assumed the missing driver had been alone. But the evidence whispered otherwise. Someone else had been in that car. Someone silent. The detective combed through archived construction crew records. The man with the fingerprint had worked with dozens over the years. Names blurred together, common, forgettable. But a pattern emerged. A supervisor whose address changes shadowed the same counties as the fingerprint match. A man never convicted of anything, never arrested, never leaving fingerprints in any database. A ghost with paperwork. He had quit the construction company abruptly a month after the disappearance. Moved states. Worked odd jobs. Then vanished from employment records entirely. Was he the second figure? The detective traced his last known address, a cramped, peeling trailer on the edge of a dried-up fishing town. The property owner said he'd moved out 20 years earlier, leaving behind unpaid rent and a metal toolbox rusted shut. Inside were screws, nails, pliers, a crumpled photograph of a job site, and a torn map with a circle drawn around mile marker 214, the exact location where the abandoned car had been found. The detective felt pressure building behind his ribs, the slow squeeze of inevitability. Two men connected to construction work on the highway. Two men overlapping in employment, geography, movement. One dead, leaving behind a single fingerprint. The other untraceable, leaving behind only silence. And between them, the missing driver unknown, unprepared, simply taking a late-night trip south that ended at the mercy of strangers whose lives intersected his by chance or by choice. What if the driver had witnessed something he wasn't meant to see? Construction sites were ripe with under-the-table deals, stolen materials, unofficial work hours. A stranger passing through at the wrong moment could become a problem. A liability. A target. Maybe the men followed him. Maybe the fingerprint was a mistake, a slip during confrontation. Maybe the half-open window wasn't a gesture of politeness, but of fear, rolled down only enough to keep distance. The detective drove the highway again at night. Humidity thickened the air until it felt like breathing through warm glass. He pulled onto the shoulder at the exact spot where the car had been found, letting the silence sink. The moon cast long white beams across the asphalt, illuminating patches of brush that could hide anything in a few steps. He imagined the missing driver's final moments, the hum of insects, the hiss of passing trucks, the sudden approach of someone who wasn't supposed to be there. Headlights swept across the detective's car as a semi roared by, and for a heartbeat, he saw it, the uncanny angle between the road and the tree line. A narrow dip invisible in daylight, but deep enough to conceal a person. A perfect blind spot. A perfect place to ambush a car pulled onto the shoulder. The detective walked into the dip. The ground was soft, uneven. And then he saw them, remnants of old wooden stakes buried beneath roots and vines. Survey markers. Construction-era markers. Evidence that the land had once been measured, studied, altered. And a faint impression in the dirt, too weathered to be recent, too symmetrical to be natural. A rectangle. The kind left by a metal container pressed into soil years earlier. Something had been buried here. Or someone. The detective knelt, brushing his hand over the imprint. The earth felt disturbed, layered differently than the soil around it. A vehicle staged on the shoulder, a confrontation, a second figure inside, two men connected to the site, a missing driver who walked or was dragged exactly 6 feet from where his car was found. Everything pointed downward. The cold case wasn't just a disappearance, it was a burial. And the ground beneath the highway had been keeping its own secret for decades. The imprint in the dirt refused to leave the detective's mind. Even after he returned to the station, even after he locked away the photos and evidence logs, the memory of that rectangular depression, weathered but intentional, pulled at him like a thread tied to something buried deep beneath the surface. Soil doesn't hold shape for decades unless it was once compacted. Unless weight pressed down. Unless something heavy lay there long enough to change the earth around it. A container. A crate. Or a body shielded by something meant to hide it. He knew he couldn't dig without authorization. Disturbing land near an active highway required permits, supervisors, coordination with transportation authorities. Layers of bureaucracy designed to delay exactly the kind of urgency the detective felt burning through his nerves. He filed the request anyway. Marked it urgent. Then waited, pacing, reading and rereading the old reports. But the more he studied them, the more they felt like the skeleton of the truth, hollow where it mattered, missing bones, missing organs, missing something fundamental that had never been documented. The original investigators had been thorough within the bounds of their time, but they had worked with assumptions that hardened into shape too quickly. They assumed the driver walked away. They assumed the scene was undisturbed. They assumed the absence of blood meant the absence of violence. They assumed the fingerprint didn't exist because they never found it. Now those assumptions formed blind spots, and the detective wondered how many other truths had been buried simply because no one had looked closely enough. 2 days passed with no approval for excavation. The detective's restlessness tightened to a knot. He drove the highway again, unable to stay away. When he stepped out onto the shoulder, heat radiated upward from the asphalt like breath from a sleeping giant. The wind shifted through the brush, carrying with it the scent of pine and old earth. He crouched at the dip again, running his fingers across the soil. It felt wrong, too compact in some places, too loose in others. As though someone had dug and refilled and dug again. Layers of history piled atop layers of secret. A car slowed, headlights washing over him. A woman leaned out the window, frowning. "You okay there, officer?" He nodded. She drove off. And for a moment, he saw what the original scene might have looked like, drivers passing without stopping, glancing briefly at a strange shape on the shoulder, never realizing they were witnessing the aftermath of a crime. Back at the station, the detective found a response waiting for him, partial approval. Limited excavation. A small team. 1 day. No heavy equipment. The site was considered environmentally sensitive, and transportation officials didn't want unnecessary disruption. It wasn't enough. But it was something. The next morning, The detective stood beside two forensic specialists and a crime scene tech equipped with soil probes. The sun rose pale and watery behind a veil of mist, making the brush shimmer like something breathing. They marked a perimeter with yellow flags, each one fluttering softly in the breeze. Then they began. Soil samples first. Slow, methodical penetration into the earth. The detective watched the tech's face as each probe was withdrawn. He could read disappointment easily. He could read interest even more. After 6 probes, nothing. After 8, nothing. After 10, something changed. The tech's brow furrowed. He inserted another probe 2 inches to the right. Withdrawn. Examined. The soil inside was darker. Older. Denser. The tech straightened, meeting the detective's eyes. Something was here, he said. The detective felt adrenaline surge, sharp as lightning. They began digging with trowels, brushing away soil, careful not to disturb anything fragile beneath. Inch by inch, color shifted. Dark to darker. Loose to compact. And then, at a depth of a foot, something metallic appeared, corroded but unmistakable. A bent hinge. The team slowed. Brushes replaced trowels. Soil whispered as it moved. More metal surfaced. A corner. Another corner. The outline of a container, maybe 3 feet long, half collapsed inward from decades of pressure. The detective felt his stomach hollow. Whatever this was, it had been intentionally buried. When they finally cleared enough to expose the top, they found the lid warped but intact. The tech used bolt cutters to remove the fragments of a rusted lock. A groan of metal echoed faintly as the lid was lifted. Inside was darkness. Then the outline of fabric. Decayed. Brittle. A shape beneath it. Not large, but not small either. The detective reached in with gloved hands, lifting the torn material. Beneath it lay a bundle of personal items, an old leather wallet, a broken watch, a photograph warped from moisture, and a metal keyring with a charm shaped like a sun. The detective recognized the charm instantly. He'd seen it in the original case photos, hanging from the missing driver's rearview mirror. The air thickened as everyone realized what this meant. The container wasn't a coffin. It was a cache, a place to hide belongings, not a body. A place someone had used to store anything that could link them to the abandoned car. Someone had removed the driver's personal items, sealed them away, and buried them mere feet from the scene, confident no one would ever find them. The detective examined each item carefully. The wallet still held an ID card. The photo showed the driver with someone whose face was scratched out, violently, as if erased by hand. The watch had stopped at 11:17 p.m., the approximate time the driver left the gas station. Or the time someone snapped the band during a struggle. But the most important discovery wasn't an object. It was absence. There was no sign of the driver's body. No remains. No trace of where he'd gone after the car was staged. The cache confirmed a crime had occurred, but not how it ended. The detective ordered the surrounding area scanned with ground-penetrating radar. The machine beeped as it rolled over uneven earth. It detected disturbances, but not all were meaningful: animal burrows, old roots, natural dips. Then a reading appeared, a void beneath the surface, too symmetrical to be natural. About 15 feet from the cache. The detective's pulse quickened. Excavation restrictions meant he couldn't dig deeper than 6 inches without further clearance. Bureaucracy tightening like a rope around the case's throat. But he couldn't ignore the reading. He documented everything. Photographed the radar. Filed a new request. He didn't sleep that night. The grave-shaped void beneath the highway pressed into his mind like a whisper. If the body was there, the case would finally have its anchor. But something bothered him: the location. Why bury belongings so close, but not the body? Why separate them? Unless the burial was rushed. Or interrupted. Or unless there had been 2 perpetrators with 2 different roles, one staging, one disposing. The detective returned to the station in the morning to find a message waiting. A woman had called. She claimed she recognized the name of the man whose fingerprint had matched. Not from news reports, those hadn't been published. But from memory. She had worked at the cafeteria of the construction site that built the highway rest stop. She said he wasn't alone. He had a friend. A tall man, quiet, clean-shaven. A man who always left the site early, but no one knew why. A man who sometimes came back with scratches on his arms. A man who had once argued violently with a fingerprint match, though no one knew what about. The detective asked for his name. She hesitated, then gave it. It was the second figure, the untraceable supervisor, the man who disappeared from records 20 years earlier. The detective's breath hardened in his chest. Every thread was converging, 2 men, 2 roles, one crime that had never been meant to unravel. He drove to the woman's house, a small pale blue structure surrounded by wind chimes. She answered the door slowly, age softening the lines in her face. He was strange, she whispered, staring past the detective as though the memory floated somewhere behind him. Strange in a way you feel before you understand. What do you mean? The detective asked. She swallowed. He watched the brush. Every day. Like he expected something to move. Or someone. The detective felt the temperature drop despite the heat outside. Did he ever talk about the highway? One time. He said the road wasn't built the way people think it was. That the land underneath wasn't cleared properly. That things were left behind. What things? She shook her head. He never said. But he didn't smile when he talked about it. The detective left with a weight behind his ribs, a sense of approaching something he couldn't yet name. Back at the site, he stared at the flagged perimeter, the buried void waiting beneath the earth. He thought of the driver. Alone. Traveling south. Caught in the orbit of 2 men who'd learned to hide their movements in the very soil they worked. And then another thought struck him, cold, sharp, unsettling. What if the missing driver hadn't been the only victim? Construction sites are transient places. Workers come and go. Records get lost. Accidents get buried beneath bureaucratic layers. If 2 men were capable of staging a scene so carefully, so cleanly, how many other traces had vanished along Florida's highways? How many drivers gone without a headline, their stories swallowed by soil no one thought to question? The detective stared at the ground, at the imprint of the cache, at the void detected by radar, and for the first time since reopening the case, he felt a shiver of dread coil through him. This wasn't a cold case. It was the edge of a pattern. One that had waited decades to be seen. The detective arrived at the office before sunrise, the sky still bruised with the final shades of night, as if the world itself hesitated before letting daylight expose what lay hidden. Everything he'd uncovered in the past week clung to him like damp air, an unearthed cache of belongings, a ground-penetrating radar hit shaped like a grave, a vanished supervisor whose silence echoed louder than any confession. He felt the case expanding, stretching into places he hadn't yet seen, a shadow growing longer the more light he tried to cast on it. He pored over the radar printout again. The void it revealed wasn't deep, just enough to shield something from quick discovery. A container? A tarp-wrapped object? The detective imagined the hands that had dug that hole, their movements frantic or calculated, sweat pooling at the base of their neck as headlights flickered across the highway above. And then burying it, not carefully, not neatly, but fast, as if expecting someone to return. Or as if interrupted. That thought gnawed at him. Interruptions meant witnesses, even accidental ones. A passing car. A curious driver pulling over. A patrol officer on a routine sweep. Someone must have seen something that night. But reports had shown nothing. Witness accounts were vague, blurred by decades. The detective decided to widen the net. He requested old highway maintenance logs, dispatch records, even weather reports from the night of the disappearance. He combed through each line until he found an anomaly, a single note logged by a deputy at 11:52 p.m., unidentified vehicle observed stopped northbound shoulder near mile 214. No response when spotlighted. Vehicle left scene 10 seconds later. The missing driver's car had been found southbound. This was northbound. Same mile marker. Same night. 2 cars. One abandoned. One fleeing. The detective stared at the note, adrenaline sparking through his veins. The deputy who wrote it had retired long ago. Tracking him down took hours. When the detective finally reached him, he found a man in his 70s sitting on a porch shaded by oak trees, a glass of iced tea sweating beside him. You remember that night? The detective asked. The old deputy squinted. You'll have to be more specific. I had nights with more chaos than sense. This was routine. A spotlight. A car on the shoulder. Around midnight. The man frowned, leaning back as something stirred in him, an old memory long buried like the items under the highway. Yeah, he murmured. I remember that one. Not because of the car, but because of the way it left. What do you mean? When I lit it up, most folks would startle, maybe wave, maybe come talk to me. But this one, no movement. No silhouette. Tint so dark I couldn't see inside. Then suddenly, engine roars, tires squeal, and it shoots off. Not like someone frightened. Like someone angry they got noticed. Did you pursue? Only for a moment. They were speeding toward an interchange under construction back then. Road closures. Cones everywhere. I backed off, didn't want to cause an accident. Didn't record the plate either. Regulations were different. Did the vehicle resemble anything you saw on the site? The detective pushed gently. The old deputy hesitated. Funny you say that. Some workers from the rest stop crew drove trucks that looked similar. But those trucks rarely had tint. A tremor of connection rippled through the detective. A truck. A fleeing vehicle. A worker with a habit of leaving early. A second figure connected to everything except factual proof. Did anyone else know about your report? The detective asked quietly. Probably not, the deputy shrugged. It wasn't a big deal at the time. But it was now. It was a missing piece slotting into the puzzle like it had waited decades for someone to notice it. The detective drove back to the highway, the sun rising behind him like a slow ignition. At mile marker 214, the brush rustled, whispering secrets from its roots. He stood at the shoulder, imagining two cars parked here on the same night, the driver's sedan on the southbound side, and a second vehicle on the northbound, hiding something or someone. The detective realized that if the second car was connected to the perpetrators, then one thing was certain: they returned after staging the scene. They hadn't fled permanently. They had come back to bury the belongings, to hide evidence. The detective followed the angle of the radar void, tracing lines in his head. If the perpetrators staged the car first, then crossed the median, then buried the container, where had their own vehicle been positioned? He walked the highway slowly until he found a flat patch of grass pressed unnaturally low, as if once crushed under tires. Not recent, but old enough to still bear a subtle memory. A staging area. The detective felt the case tightening around him, everything funneling toward a single point. He marked the coordinates and recorded them. Then he noticed something else, an indentation near the tree line, shaped like a boot print, fossilized in hardened mud. The tread pattern was nearly erased by time, but not entirely. He photographed it, intending to compare it with archived images of boots worn by the construction crew. Back at the station, he dug into employment records again. He focused on the supervisor, the ghost. He needed patterns, addresses, financials, anything. What he found was stranger than expected. In the months before the disappearance, the supervisor had made multiple cash withdrawals, small but consistent. Then, immediately after the disappearance and his abrupt departure from the job site, he deposited a single larger sum, still modest, but suspicious given his salary. Where had the money come from? The detective checked the fingerprint matches financials. Nothing unusual. No transactions linking the two. But when he cross-referenced their employment schedules, he found something chilling. They had worked late shifts together the week before the disappearance. Not just overlapping hours. Shared assignments. The supervisor was never listed officially, but handwritten notes from the previous foreman revealed that he often stayed late, helping finish tasks after crews went home. A habit that would give anyone privacy. And time. The detective rubbed his temples, the shape of the truth sharpening like the point of a blade. He reached out to the foreman, now living in a retirement community. The man answered slowly, lowering himself into a chair across from the detective. What do you remember about the supervisor? The detective asked. The foreman sighed. He was efficient. Reliable. But wrong somehow. Not dangerous, just hollow. Like he functioned, but nothing behind the eyes. Did he ever argue with the fingerprint match? Often. About stupid things. Supplies, overtime. They weren't friends. Did he ever talk about the highway? The foreman nodded. Said it changed him. I laughed at the time. But he didn't. What did he mean? He said, this land doesn't let go of anything. I thought he meant the soil. Sticky clay. But now I don't know. The detective returned to the evidence board, pinning new findings in place. A pattern emerged, not random, not chaotic, but purposeful. 2 men working late shifts. A disappearing driver. A staged vehicle. Buried belongings. A radar void. A fleeing truck. Cash withdrawals implying preparation. A deposit implying reward or payoff. A supervisor who studied the land as if anticipating its use. He studied the scratched photograph found in the cache. The missing driver stood beside a blurred figure, face gouged out by aggressive fingernail marks. The detective magnified it. Not enough detail for identification, but the height, build, and posture were unmistakable. Someone taller. Someone close. Someone who didn't want their face attached to the driver's final night. Why? The detective turned off the lights and stared at the board in the dim glow of street lamps filtering through blinds. Patterns often reveal themselves in darkness, where the mind quiets enough to see what had been hiding in plain sight. He thought of the supervisor's vanished records. The way he left abruptly. The way he was always described quiet, observing, hollow. He contrasted that with the fingerprint match, a watcher too, but one who didn't hide his presence. 2 men with similar behaviors, but different roles. One was the observer. One was the executor. He pulled out crime scene photos of the driver's sedan again. The passenger seatbelt was buckled. No one had noticed it before because it didn't stand out. But the driver didn't have a passenger. And the belt was buckled too neatly, too precisely. Someone had sat there. Or someone wanted it to look like no one had. The detective leaned forward, pulse kicking. The buckle showed faint marks, a tension point inconsistent with normal use. Someone had pulled it tight. Restraint tight. The driver hadn't walked away. He hadn't run into the woods. He hadn't vanished. He had been taken. The detective returned to the site the next morning before the excavation permit arrived. He didn't cross boundaries or dig. He simply stood in the soft morning light, staring at the highway, scanning for what he had missed. And then he saw it. Behind a cluster of palmetto bushes, hidden by years of growth, lay an old service road used during construction. Overgrown. Forgotten. But wide enough to allow a truck to pull off unseen. Wide enough to move something or someone without headlights catching attention from the highway. The detective followed it slowly. Branches scraped his sleeves. Birds scattered as he approached. The road curved sharply, disappearing behind a curtain of vines. And then he saw fresh disturbance, soil kicked up by recent activity, subtle, but different from the natural patterns. Someone had been here. Recently. Not decades ago. The detective's breath caught. The case wasn't just a historical unraveling. Someone tied to the story was still alive. Still moving. Still watching. He crouched at the edge of the disturbed soil. A tire track, faint but present, curved into the brush. Not a modern SUV or sedan. Something heavier. Ribbed tread. Industrial. Like an old construction truck still limping through back roads. He followed the track until it ended at a small clearing where the air felt too still, too intentional. As if waiting. Something white caught his eye near a log. A scrap of paper weighted by a stone. He approached cautiously. On it, written in a shaky hand. You should stop digging. The detective froze. The clearing around him seemed to tighten, the silence becoming a presence. Someone knew he was looking. Someone wanted him to stop. He folded the note carefully, slid it into his pocket, and straightened slowly, scanning the tree line. No movement. No sound. But the message was clear. The cold case wasn't cold anymore. It was awake. And whatever waited beneath the soil at mile marker 214 wasn't done speaking. The note sat in the detective's pocket like a living pulse, warm against his leg despite the morning chill that clung to the brush. You should stop digging. The handwriting shaky, uneven, Not from age, but from adrenaline. Someone had written it quickly, nervously, perhaps while watching him from the cover of the trees. The detective scanned the clearing again, his eyes sweeping across branches that swayed with the slightest pressure of wind. No footprints. No cigarette ash. No discarded bottle. Whoever left the message was careful. Or practiced. Or both. He walked back toward the main highway with an uneasy awareness prickling beneath his skin. Something had shifted. The case no longer felt like an old wound being reopened. It felt like a struggle with someone who was still holding the thread tightly on the other end. Someone who might be closer than he realized. At the station, he slid the note into an evidence sleeve and placed it under magnification. The fibers matched common notebook paper, the kind sold everywhere. The ink was standard ballpoint. No identifiable markers. But the handwriting jagged strokes, inconsistent angles, pressure concentrated on the downstrokes. The script of someone who wrote rarely but urgently. The detective filed it, but kept the image burned in his mind. He needed to know whether the writer was warning him out of fear or threat. Before he could decide, his phone buzzed. A call from the Forensic Anthropology Unit. They had processed the items recovered from the buried cache. The detective drove across town, the wind slicing against the windows. When he arrived, a technician guided him to a table where the belongings lay under white light. The leather wallet had stiffened but retained its shape. The keyring's sun-shaped charm glinted faintly. But the torn photograph drew the detective's eyes. The technician had digitally enhanced the scratched, blurred second figure. The face was still unrecognizable, but the build, the shoulders, the posture suggested someone taller than the driver. Someone standing slightly behind him, arm almost touching his. A closeness that didn't read as random. This wasn't a stranger, the technician said quietly. The body language suggests familiarity. Familiarity, but the face was maliciously removed. As though the very image of that person was dangerous. Anything else? The detective asked. The technician hesitated, then held out a plastic dish. Inside was a small, cylindrical object no larger than a fingertip, corroded metal, barely identifiable. What is it? The detective asked. A piece of a fastener. Possibly from a tool belt. These were common among construction crews from the 80s. Construction again. Always construction. Every clue circled back to the same two men. The detective drove next to the archives warehouse, requesting access to blueprints of the Rest Stop project. Old plans, drawings, notes. He wanted to understand the land itself, the soil, the staging areas, the access points. When the clerk unearthed a folder brittle with age, the detective carried it into a quiet room and began reading. The blueprints mapped something unexpected, a temporary equipment storage zone just yards from where the driver's cache had been buried. A zone cleared, flattened, then abandoned once the permanent buildings were finished. No one ever bothered restoring the land. Brush grew over it, burying its history under roots and weeds. The detective traced the lines of the blueprint with his finger. That storage zone, hidden by time, would have been the perfect place to bury something quickly, without headlights exposing movement to passing drivers. The perfect place to stage a container. The perfect place to hide a body. The thought tightened around him with chilling clarity. He requested updated permits for a deeper excavation. Bureaucracy pushed back again. Environmental restrictions, liability concerns, cost limitations. But the detective wasn't backing down. He submitted paperwork twice, then called supervisors, insisting. Something was beneath that soil. Something tied to a man who vanished and two men who had used the land as their shield. That night, exhausted but too wired to rest, he returned to the evidence board pinned with string and photos. He stared at the timeline. 10:43 p.m., gas station. 11:17 p.m., watch stops. 11:52 p.m., deputy sees fleeing vehicle. Morning, car discovered. Between those times, the driver's life ended. And the perpetrators worked fast, too fast for amateurs. They knew the terrain intimately. They knew where headlights hit. They knew where soil was softest. Only men who worked there daily could move with such knowledge. But the detective kept returning to one detail, the torn photograph. The driver was smiling. The other figure, face scratched out, stood closer than a stranger would. Who erases themselves from a photo? Not the victim. The perpetrator. What if the driver knew the supervisor? Not well. Not socially. But what if their paths crossed before that night? The detective pulled up missing persons files from counties the driver had previously lived in. He searched for overlapping addresses, overlapping workplaces, overlapping social circles. Nothing. But sometimes the absence of connection is itself a clue. The detective followed the hypothesis backward. If the driver didn't know the supervisor, then how did the photograph come into the supervisor's possession? Why bury it? Why scratch out his own face? Unless the supervisor wasn't erasing himself because he feared the police, but because he feared someone else. Someone he worked with. Someone stronger. Someone dangerous. Someone who could make a man disappear. Someone who now might be watching the detective. That thought pulled him back to the note. You should stop digging. Not plural. Singular. One person. The detective left the office and drove home, but he didn't go inside. Instead, he circled the block and parked a street away. He wanted to see whether anyone followed. Whether headlights paused. Whether a silhouette lingered in the dark. Nothing. Yet the unease didn't fade. The next morning, he received a call that jolted his nerves. A highway worker cleaning debris near mile marker 214 had found something caught in a clump of weeds, a torn strip of fabric aged by sun and rain. The worker had tossed it aside until he recognized the faded blue color. Denim. Possibly old. Possibly from a work uniform. Possibly from someone involved. The detective retrieved it personally. He held the fabric up to the light. Threads frayed, edges uneven, torn by force. He drove it directly to the lab. They confirmed it was denim from a work jacket manufactured in the mid-80s, the kind issued to construction crews operating along that highway corridor. If the fabric had been near the surface, and someone had recently disturbed soil near that spot. Whoever had left the note had been closer than the detective realized. He returned once more to the overgrown service road. The branches seemed denser this time, as if the forest itself tried to hide the path. But he walked slowly, carefully listening. Every sound felt amplified, the crunch of leaves underfoot, the distant roar of passing cars, the drumming of his own heartbeat. When he reached the clearing again, he expected the note to be gone. Instead, something else lay beneath the same stone. A second note. He exhaled hard. This one read, "You're digging in the wrong place." The detective swallowed, tension climbing his spine. Wrong place. The radar void wasn't the target? The cache wasn't the primary burial? Was someone guiding him or misleading him? He studied the clearing carefully. The soil disturbance hadn't increased. No new footprints. No sense. The person leaving the notes was deliberate, skillful, and comfortable in these woods. They knew the detective's schedule. They watched. But why give clues? Unless the writer wasn't one of the perpetrators. Unless they were afraid of one. Unless they were trying to steer the investigation toward the truth before someone else buried it again. That night, while reviewing the construction company's internal records, the detective stumbled across something he had missed, a safety incident report filed 5 months before the disappearance. Non-injury. No police involvement. Worker argument escalated. Party names redacted due to company policy. But in the margins, faint pencil marks remained, initials. One set belonged to the fingerprint match. The other set belonged to the supervisor. The detective enlarged the scan until the pixels blurred. The initials were followed by a short, frustrated notation from the foreman. Conflict ongoing. Supervisor unstable. Unstable. That word changed everything. What if the supervisor was the catalyst? What if the fingerprint match wasn't the orchestrator, but the subordinate? The reluctant participant? The watcher who monitored while the supervisor acted? What if the fingerprint match wasn't the villain, but the witness? The eyewitness who never came forward because the supervisor wouldn't let him. Because the supervisor was dangerous. Because the supervisor controlled everything, including whether the witness lived. Then why did the fingerprint end up inside the driver's car? Because witnesses panic. Because scenes go wrong. Because the supervisor needed him close. So where was the supervisor now? Vanished. As though swallowed by the land he once worked. A knock at the detective's door broke his train of thought. He froze. The knock was too soft to be a threat, too hesitant to be friendly. He opened the door slowly. A man stood in the shadow of the porch. Middle-aged. Rough-hewn face. Eyes restless. Clothes worn. "I heard you're asking questions about the old crew," the man said. The detective kept his hand near his holster. "Who are you?" "A guy who used to work with them." His voice trembled. "And a guy who probably shouldn't be here." "What do you want?" The man swallowed hard. "To tell you that you need protection if you're going after him." "Going after who?" The man looked over his shoulder, as if expecting someone to rise from the darkness. "The supervisor," he whispered. "What do you know about him?" Another swallow. Another glance. Fear living under his skin. "He doesn't stop," the man whispered. "Not even after death." The detective frowned. "He's not dead." Silence. Then a slow, bitter shake of the head. "That's the problem," the man said. "He should be." The detective stepped closer. "Where is he?" The man stepped back, shaking, voice dropping to a thread of sound. "You're digging in the wrong place," he said. "But he isn't." Before the detective could ask another question, the man fled into the night, swallowed by shadow, leaving only one truth ringing in the detective's ears. The supervisor wasn't gone. He was somewhere near the highway. Somewhere watching. Somewhere waiting. And the detective had just stepped into his territory. The man's final words echoed in the detective's head long after his footsteps dissolved into the darkness. "He's digging in the wrong place." It wasn't a warning, it was a map carved into fear. The detective stood motionless on his porch, staring into the direction the man had fled, trying to decide whether he had just spoken to a terrified witness or a man already hunted. A gust of wind dragged through the trees, bending branches as if something unseen moved along the edge of the neighborhood. The detective locked his door, not out of paranoia, but calculation. Someone had been leaving notes. Someone had approached him tonight. Someone else might be watching both. Inside, he sat at his kitchen table, the house quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator. He laid out the notes, the first from the clearing, the second left earlier that day. Their handwriting didn't match entirely. The first was shaky but controlled. The second was fast, slanted, urgent. And the witness tonight, the man who warned him on the porch, spoke with a tremor that didn't match either style. 3 signals, 3 sources. Unless someone was disguising their writing. Unless fear changed the hand. But one fact anchored itself: whoever left the notes wanted him alive. Whoever he met tonight believed the supervisor wanted him gone. Sleep was impossible. The detective sat awake until morning, reviewing every detail the witness had offered. Fragmented, cryptic, soaked in dread. But truth lived inside fear. The witness had known something real, something weighty enough to drive him into hiding for decades. Something strong enough to pull him out of hiding now. He returned to the station at dawn, the sky a smear of orange stretching across the horizon. His supervisor glared at the excavation requests piling on her desk. "You're losing perspective," she warned. "This case is consuming you." The detective leaned forward. "Someone involved in the original crime is still alive. He's been near the scene. He's watching us. And he doesn't want the truth found. Then we let the task force handle it. He'll vanish before they even organize the briefing," the detective said. "He's already one step ahead." She stared at him for a long moment, then sighed. "You get one more day." "One. If you don't find something concrete, we shut this down." He nodded, though he knew shutting this down wouldn't stop what was moving beneath the surface. He returned to the highway with a quiet, sharpened focus. Traffic thundered past in waves, oblivious to the secrets nestled behind the guardrails. He walked along the overgrown service road again. Morning sunlight cut through the branches in harsh, angled beams. Birds scattered in bursts of wings. Every shadow looked like a crouched silhouette. Every rustle felt like breath. He reached the clearing where the notes had been left. No new message today. But the soil disturbance had grown. Slightly. Barely. Enough that a trained eye noticed. Someone had been here overnight. Digging. Not shallow. Deep. He knelt and pressed his hand into the fresh depression. The earth was soft, recently overturned. He dug gently with the edge of a pen, lifting a small clump of dirt. Beneath it, a splinter of wood. Weathered. Possibly old. Possibly new. The detective pocketed it. Then he stood, backed away, and scanned the treeline. A flash of movement caught his eye, too fluid to be an animal, too deliberate. He moved toward it, but found nothing except a trail of crushed leaves leading nowhere. Whoever was watching him had mastered the art of disappearing into nature. Back at the station, he had the wood splinter analyzed. Oak. Untreated. A fragment consistent with crates used during the highway's original construction. That meant someone had dug up the cache originally buried decades ago, likely searching for something left behind. Something the perpetrator feared the detective might find. But the question was, what? Personal items had been buried in the cache. But what if the perpetrators had buried something else nearby? Something they retrieved recently? Something incriminating enough that even after 30 years, the supervisor couldn't risk leaving it behind? The detective expanded the search radius. He spent hours combing through maps, soil surveys, historical records of the construction site. He found reference to a temporary structure, a portable office trailer that once sat south of the rest stop construction zone. Removed before the highway opened. The location wasn't recorded precisely, but it would have been within walking distance of the driver's burial site. He drove there. What remained was a glade swallowed by trees. The earth felt disturbed beneath his boots. Not recently, historically. Something heavy had sat here long enough to compress the ground permanently. A metal office trailer. A shelter. And possibly a hiding spot. The detective paced the glade, imagining the supervisor working inside that trailer decades ago alone, late at night, with hours to plan whatever he had done to the driver. The detective crouched and brushed aside decaying leaves until his fingers grazed something thin and metallic. He lifted it. A rusted paperclip. Meaningless to anyone else. But to the detective, it meant activity. Office work. Storage. And the possibility that paperwork had once existed here. Paperwork that might have named the supervisor. Or maybe the driver. Or maybe another victim. He marked the site and kept searching. Farther back, partially hidden beneath a curtain of moss, he spotted something that made his breath hitch, a wooden post, cracked at the top, half buried in the earth. A former foundation support. He circled it, pushing aside overgrowth. Then he spotted another. And another. Forming a rectangle. And in the center of that rectangle lay a depression in the soil, circular, unnaturally smooth. He knelt beside it. The depression wasn't made by nature. Something had been placed here. Something round. Something heavy. A drum. A 55-gallon drum. Burial container. He brushed dirt aside. Then more. A small patch of rusted metal flashed beneath the soil. His pulse spiked. He grabbed his radio. I need an excavation unit at mile marker 214, southbound service road, off-grid. Potential burial chamber located. The dispatcher paused. Authorization pending. No, the detective snapped. Send them now. Maybe it was the urgency in his voice. Maybe the cold case label carried weight now. Maybe the supervisor upstairs finally understood the danger. But backup arrived. A forensic team cordoned the area. They began digging around the drum carefully. Soil gave way in slow layers. The drum revealed itself in corroded segments. When they finally removed enough earth to expose its lid, the detective's breath turned shallow. Open it, he said. The techs pried the lid with industrial cutters. Rust groaned as metal separated. Inside, they found fabric first. Blue. Faded. Denim. A jacket. Beneath it, bones. Not many. Just fragments of fingers. Phalanges. A partial hand. But enough to confirm, someone had been dismembered and placed inside decades ago. Not the missing driver. The bones were too small. Too old. Wrong sex. Wrong height. A different victim. The detective staggered back, dizziness washing over him. It wasn't just one disappearance. It wasn't one cold case. It was a pattern. A burial ground. A hunting territory. And the supervisor hadn't disappeared 2 decades ago. He had been slipping in and out of the woods, returning to his old sites, retrieving evidence, watching the detective inch closer. The detective stared at the bones until the shapes blurred. Another drum was found 15 feet away. And another radar hit appeared 10 feet beyond that. The site wasn't a single grave. It was a grid. A hidden cemetery. The detective felt a cold truth settling inside him like a stone dropped into deep water. The missing driver had stumbled into someone else's world, a world built on silence and burial, and the supervisor had been its architect long before that night. As the forensic team worked, the detective stepped away to catch his breath. The air tasted heavy, metallic, suffocating. He leaned against a tree, gripping its bark to steady himself. Then he heard it. A snap of twigs. He turned sharply. In the distance, barely visible between 2 pines, a silhouette stood tall, unmoving. Watching him. The detective's pulse exploded. He moved forward, but the silhouette stepped back, dissolving into the woods with unnatural ease. But not before the detective saw one thing. A denim sleeve. Old. Faded. Frayed from years of wear. The same kind worn by the construction crew. The same kind found in pieces near the highway. The same kind buried inside the drum. The supervisor was alive. And he wasn't hiding anymore. He was stalking. Waiting for the detective to come closer to the truth. Waiting for the detective to step out of the light. And into the forest where the supervisor controlled everything. The silhouette's disappearance left the detective standing alone in the forest, the moment stretching into something unreal, as though the trees had closed around the space where the figure had stood, swallowing it whole. The detective's skin prickled with the unmistakable sensation of being watched, not by the forest, but by a man who knew this land like a second skin, a man who had turned it into a graveyard. The detective grit his teeth, pulse hammering, forcing himself to breathe evenly. Panic would make him reckless. Recklessness would make him predictable. And predictability, he suspected, was exactly what the supervisor wanted. He returned to the excavation site, forcing composure back into place. Forensic technicians moved with grim efficiency, digging around the newly discovered drums. One of them glanced at the detective as he approached, eyes sharp with a question he couldn't yet answer. How many victims are buried here? He didn't know. No one knew. But the drums suggested a pattern too deliberate to be the impulsive work of a single night. This wasn't murder born of opportunity. This was ritual. This was a routine. The second drum was half uncovered, rust flaking away like dead skin. A technician crouched beside it, brushing soil off with gentle strokes. "This one is older," she murmured. "Maybe by a few years. Hard to tell until we get it open." The detective nodded, though his thoughts whirled. If there were multiple victims, the missing driver wasn't the first and might not be the last. The supervisor had vanished from public life, but he hadn't stopped returning here. The disturbed soil in the clearing proved that. The notes proved that. The new denim scrap near the highway proved that. The detective felt the weight of every second pressing down on him. The supervisor wasn't a ghost. He was a hunter. And hunters always circle back to familiar ground. The lid of the second drum groaned as metal cutters forced it open. The detective leaned closer, bracing himself. Inside lay more fragments, fabric, bone, decayed remnants clinging to the bottom like a shadow of the life once contained there. But something else caught his eye, a small metal tag, half rusted, half preserved by some miracle. A worker ID badge. Not the driver's. Not the fingerprint matches. Someone else entirely. The detective's breath turned sharp. Another man from the crew. Another person who had simply vanished from records without explanation. Another life erased by soil and time. The lead forensic tech approached. "Detective," she said quietly, "we've run preliminary measurements on the phalanges from the first drum. The bones belong to a woman. A woman. Not a worker. Not from the crew. A wild card. A loose thread cut clean. The supervisor's pattern wasn't limited to his coworkers. The detective pressed his fingers into his brow, pushing back the rising sense of dread. The man he was tracking wasn't just a killer, he was a collector. Victims chosen from different contexts, different lives, buried in the same hidden grid behind the highway he'd helped build. A forensic tech approached with a clipboard. "Detective, you'll want to see this." He followed her to the far edge of the excavation perimeter, where the radar operator had set up his equipment again. "We've expanded the scan," he said. "Sir, there are at least 7 additional anomalies. All drum-shaped. 7. 7 bodies. Possibly more." The detective staggered internally, though his outward posture held. 7 graves, concealed for decades by someone who had blended into a workforce of dozens. No one questioned the supervisor's solitude. No one questioned his late hours. No one questioned his disappearances. He existed exactly how he needed to hide in plain sight. The detective stared at the radar screen, feeling the forest watching him. 7 drums. 7 unknown victims. And somewhere among them, the missing driver. Maybe intact. Maybe dismembered. Maybe buried deeper. "What if the driver isn't here?" the technician asked. The detective didn't respond. He didn't need to. The question was too heavy, too real. If the driver wasn't buried here, his body could be anywhere. Hidden in a place even the supervisor feared the detective might find someday. But the detective wasn't guessing anymore. He was tracking. And every clue pointed toward escalation. The supervisor wasn't hiding because he was afraid. He was hiding because he wasn't finished. As the technicians continued work, the detective stepped away again, letting the sounds of shovels and soft exclamations fade behind him. He walked deeper into the woods north, following instinct more than map. The air thickened, the canopies swallowing light in uneven patches. He moved slowly, checking footprints, scanning the ground for anything unusual. 10 minutes in, he saw it, a tree with its bark stripped at chest height in a ragged, vertical slash. Not the work of an animal. Too calculated. Too human. He approached and ran a hand across the scarred surface. It was rough. Recent. The sap still wet. A marker. A sign. Or a warning. He turned in a slow circle, aware of the silence. The forest had gone still again. No insects. No birds. Even the breeze avoided this pocket of land. Then another mark caught his eye. 20 feet ahead, another tree stripped in the same way. And another. A path. A trail. A message. He followed the markers cautiously, senses sharpening with every step. The forest thickened. Vines clawed at his ankles, branches tugged at his sleeves. The marks grew more aggressive as he went, deeper gouges, fresher sap, more frantic scraping. It felt like walking through a story told in scratches. Eventually, the path opened into a clearing the detective had never seen before. A small circle of earth, unnaturally smooth, as if cleared repeatedly over the years. In the center stood the remnants of a wooden structure, some kind of small shed or watch post, long collapsed inward. The roof bowed. One wall completely missing. Leaves piled thick around its base. The detective approached slowly. Inside the collapsed structure, something glinted faintly under debris. He crouched, brushed away leaves, and uncovered a small metal hammer, rusted but intact, its handle marked with faded numbers. A construction company ID. The same company the supervisor worked for. But the hammer wasn't the most disturbing thing. Beside it lay a coil of rope, old, frayed, but unmistakably used. And beneath the rope, partially buried in dirt, lay something that made the detective's blood run cold. A driver's license. He picked it up with gloved fingers. The plastic was clouded. The photo inside nearly faded to nothing. But the name remained. Not the missing driver. Another man. Another disappearance never linked to the Rest Stop project. Another life buried by the supervisor's silence. The detective's chest tightened. He scanned the perimeter. Bushes rustled faintly. A presence moved just beyond sight, shifting weight silently. He wasn't alone. "Show yourself," the detective called out, voice steady but low. Silence. A branch snapped. The detective drew his gun. A shadow moved between trees, too quick to identify, too fluid, too practiced. The detective moved toward it, but the shadow slipped away effortlessly, as though the forest carried it along. He stopped chasing. The supervisor wanted him to follow, wanted him deeper, wanted him isolated. The detective retreated carefully, backing out of the clearing, returning to the excavation site where other humans still existed. But his return didn't ease anything. The excavation team was gathered around the third drum now, faces pale. The detective jogged toward them. "What's inside?" he demanded. The tech swallowed hard. "Not bones. Not yet. Something else." She lifted a sealed evidence bag containing a stained scrap of fabric, white cotton, stiffened by age, marked with something that looked like dried paint or no. Not paint. Words. The detective held it up. Faded letters formed a fragmented phrase. Last one, highway watching. A message left from a victim? Or from the perpetrator? The detective's skin crawled. A chill swept across the excavation site. Even the sun felt dimmer now. He knelt beside the drum, gloved hands brushing the interior. There were no bones yet, but the bottom of the drum held circular scoring, as if something had been removed. Something heavy. Something recently uprooted. The supervisor had returned. And taken something with him. The detective stepped back, breathing hard. The supervisor wasn't just watching. He was adjusting the scene. Removing evidence. Preparing the land again. Preparing for the detective. As the detective stared at the drum, a realization slid cold into place. The supervisor wasn't trying to stop the excavation. He was trying to control it. The detective's radio crackled suddenly. Static first, then a single voice, male, rasping, distorted by distance and interference. "Detective." The detective's heart hammered. He raised the radio. "Identify yourself." Silence. Then, "You're getting close." The detective froze. "Who is this?" A soft exhale. Almost a laugh. "I've been waiting for someone to see what's really here." The detective swallowed hard. "Where are you?" Another pause. Then, "Turn around." The detective spun, gun drawn. Nothing. Just trees. Brush. The wind. But the voice returned one last time. "Wrong place again, detective. But keep digging." Static swallowed the signal. The detective lowered the radio slowly, feeling the weight of the forest press against him like a closing fist. The supervisor wasn't hiding in shadows. He was standing just beyond the reach of every truth. Guiding. Watching. Hunting. And the detective now understood the most terrifying part. The supervisor didn't fear discovery. He welcomed it. The detective stood frozen, the radio still warm in his hand, the forest holding its breath around him. The supervisor's voice, rasped, disembodied, echoing through static, seemed to cling to the trees like a film that refused to evaporate. "Wrong place again, detective. But keep digging." Was it taunt or guidance? A warning or a lure? The detective didn't know, but the man's confidence, the calm edge in his voice, struck deeper than any threat. This wasn't someone afraid of being caught. This was someone who had lived inside the shadows so long he'd forgotten how to fear the light. The detective walked back toward the excavation site, each step measured, as though the ground itself might shift beneath him. When he emerged from the trees, the forensic team paused, sensing the change in him. He didn't speak about the voice on the radio. Not yet. Not until he understood the implications. More drums were being unearthed now, each revealing its own grim fragment of the supervisor's past: a torn shoe, degraded cloth fibers, rusted jewelry that once belonged to someone who walked into the wrong corner of the wrong world. One drum in particular held only objects, no bones. A crushed metal thermos. A mangled key. A broken eyeglass frame. Items stripped of context, stripped of identity, stripped of everything except the quiet terror they represented. The detective ran his fingers across the eyeglass frame through the plastic evidence bag. Lightweight. Cheap. Could have belonged to anyone. Could have belonged to the driver. Could have belonged to a witness who stumbled upon the supervisor at the wrong hour. The forensic lead approached him. "Detective," she murmured, voice steady, but eyes shaken, "we're going to need more hands. This isn't just a cold case site. It's a mass burial." He nodded. The weight of it pressed into the back of his skull. A mass burial. A burial field hidden behind a highway used every day by thousands of people who never suspected they were passing a graveyard. The detective stepped away from the cluster of investigators, feeling the enormity of the discovery crawling beneath his skin. He looked down the slope of the service road, once a path of movement, now a path of memory. The detective pulled out the 2 notes found earlier. "You should stop digging. You're digging in the wrong place." But what if both were pointing in the same direction? Not telling him to stop, not steering him away from the drum field, but steering him past it. Toward something deeper. Something older. Something even the supervisor feared. He replayed the supervisor's words. "You're getting close." Close to what? The truth? The driver's body? Or the unfinished part of the supervisor's dark craft? As the excavation team worked, the detective slipped back into the forest, following the intuitive pull that had guided him since the beginning. The air thickened as he moved deeper, the canopy tightening above him into a layered ceiling of green and shadow. Birds scattered abruptly, taking flight with frantic beats of wings. The detective paused, listening. A faint crackle. A low hum. Not wind. Not insects. Radio frequency interference. Someone was transmitting nearby. He followed the distortion until he reached a ridge of earth shaped like a shallow mound, natural at first glance, but too smooth, too deliberate in its curvature. He crouched and brushed away the top layer of leaves. Beneath them, he found stone. Large. Flat. Weathered by time and exposure, but unmistakably placed there, not naturally formed. A marker. A lid. The detective's breath hitched. He moved the leaves away completely. The stone slab measured roughly 4 feet long, 2 feet wide. Edges chiseled by human hands. Not modern hands. Old. Maybe older than the highway itself. He pressed his palm against it. Cool. Still. Heavy. The detective set his jaw. Whatever lay beneath the stone wasn't placed here by the supervisor alone. This was older. Deeper. Something the supervisor had found and used. He circled the slab slowly, scanning for tool marks. Faint impressions lined the edges of the mound, shovel strikes. Some fresh. Some decades old. The detective knelt and saw it clearly. Someone had tried to open this slab before. Recently. Very recently. A bead of sweat trailed down his temple despite the cool air. This was what the supervisor had been digging for. He touched his radio. "Unit dispatch, I need a forensics team at my location. Coordinates inbound." Static. Then silence. He frowned, tapping the transmitter again. Nothing. Someone was jamming the signal. A twig snapped behind him. He stood instantly, hand at his holster, eyes cutting through branches. The forest stared back. Nothing moved. But the silence had changed, thickened. He felt it. The way the air shifts when another presence slips into it. "Come out," he said quietly. No reply. He walked toward the sound's origin, steps soft, controlled. The ground dipped sharply into a ravine, roots twisting like skeletal fingers across its slope. He moved slowly along the ridge, scanning every shadow. Then he saw it. Not a person. A piece of cloth. Dangling from a low branch. Old denim. Frayed. Torn clean at the seam. Another sign. Another breadcrumb. But placed right where he'd find it. The detective touched the cloth gently. It crumbled at the edges. Sun-bleached. Wind-worn. But the tear was fresh. Clean. As if someone had ripped it only hours ago. He pocketed it and returned to the slab. He pushed his shoulder against the stone. It didn't budge. He dug fingers beneath its edge, couldn't lift it. It would take equipment, leverage, manpower. But the supervisor had been trying. The detective stepped back and noticed something else, faint drag marks leading away from the slab, disappearing into brush. Like someone had pulled something heavy across the ground. Or someone. He followed the drag marks. They led to a thicket so dense it seemed impenetrable, but the detective forced himself through, branches clawing at his clothes. Beyond it lay another clearing, smaller than the others. Sunlight pierced through broken tree limbs overhead, illuminating one object in the center. A shallow hole. Fresh. No wider than a grave. Dusty, loose soil surrounded it. The detective knelt and touched the edge. The earth was still damp underneath. He reached into his pocket and used a small folding trowel to scoop a handful. It smelled of old wood, rust, and something else, something metallic beneath the natural earth odor. A forensic scent. He scraped deeper. Something glinted. Metal. He dug faster. A shape emerged, a small metal box, no bigger than a book, coated in dirt but intact. The detective eased it out of the ground carefully, brushing away soil with trembling fingers. The lid bore an engraving. Faded. Scratched. But legible. 214. The detective's chest tightened. The mile marker number. The epicenter of everything. He carefully pried the box open. Inside was a stack of papers, warped from moisture but readable. Handwritten notes. Maps. Names. Dates. Observations scrawled in the same careful, neat handwriting from 30 years earlier. The supervisor's handwriting. The first page documented the rest stop construction project with chilling precision, shift changes, worker rotations, equipment deliveries. The second page listed names. Workers. Passers-by. Single entry lines marked with symbols. Some circled. Some crossed out. Some with a simple dash, no meaning unless you knew the code. And scrawled across the bottom of the page. Only the unnoticed disappear cleanly. The detective's stomach twisted. He flipped to the next page. A map of the woods. Hand-drawn. Detailed. With X's marking burial sites. 7 X's. The same number detected by radar. But there was an 8th X farther out, near a curve in the old service road. A location not yet discovered. The detective swallowed, flipping to the final page. A single line written in the same calm hand. He watched me. He shouldn't have. Beneath it. A sketch. A rough likeness. Of the missing driver. The detective's grip tightened on the metal box. He didn't hear the footsteps until it was almost too late. A shift in the air. A crunch of leaves. He spun. A figure stood at the edge of the clearing. Tall. Still. Denim jacket torn at the sleeve. Face obscured by shadow. Motionless. Watching him the way predators watch the moment prey realizes it's already been chosen. The detective raised his weapon. Put your hands where I can see them. The figure didn't move. Didn't flinch. Didn't breathe. The detective stepped forward cautiously, gun trained, sweat sliding down his spine. Let me see your hands, he repeated louder. The figure's head tilted slightly, mechanically, like an animal studying whether he was worth the chase. A voice low, gravelly, unmistakable, broke across the clearing. You're closer now, it said. Closer than anyone's ever been. The detective's pulse exploded. Who are you? He demanded. Silence. Then, wrong question, detective. A single step backward. The crunch of leaves. Ask where I am. The figure melted into the trees, disappearing with supernatural ease. The detective lunged forward, but branches swallowed the path, closing instantly behind the man's retreat. The detective stopped, breath ragged. He turned in a slow circle, alone again. But not alone. Not anymore. Because now he understood the most terrifying truth yet. The supervisor wasn't merely hiding in the woods. He was living inside them. Rooted in every shadow. Watching every step. And the detective, with the metal box clutched to his chest, had just stepped into the supervisor's final design. A game with rules written decades before he ever arrived. A game with only one ending. The forest swallowed the supervisor's final words, leaving the detective standing utterly still, the metal box pressed tight against his chest, his breath fogging faintly in the cooling air. Ask where I am. The phrase ricocheted through him like a bullet that refused to come to rest. The supervisor had spoken in riddles since the moment he emerged from the shadows of the case, but this one was different. It wasn't a taunt. It wasn't a warning. It was an invitation into a deeper layer of the truth, one the detective felt tightening around him like a noose with every passing second. He backed out of the clearing slowly, weapons still drawn, listening for footsteps that never came. The forest had returned to its eerie stillness. Cicadas resumed their distant, pulsing drone, as if unaware the woods had just hosted a ghost made of flesh and bone. The detective didn't holster his gun until he reached the edges of the excavation site again, where the voices of forensic technicians buzzed softly beneath the canopy. But even here, surrounded by people, he felt the supervisor's gaze lingering on the back of his neck. "Detective," one of the technicians called, stepping toward him. "We've uncovered 2 more drums. Same pattern. Same age. Same." She paused when she saw his face. "Are you all right?" He nodded once, curt, already moving past her. He carried the metal box under his arm like a fragile organ, keeping the case alive. He didn't tell the technicians about seeing the supervisor. Not yet. If he spoke it aloud, if he acknowledged it too quickly, it would take shape in their minds as panic. And panic was the one thing the supervisor fed on. At the station, he placed the metal box on a steel table under bright white evidence lights. He opened it again, flipping through the supervisor's notes slowly, methodically, forcing himself not to skip ahead even when his eyes begged to find the missing driver's name. The handwriting steady, obsessive, detailed more than shifts and names. It detailed patterns. Times of day when the forest was quietest. Points along the highway where no patrol cars ever lingered. The months when bodies decomposed fastest. The years when soil conditions changed just enough to bury more without leaving visible disturbance. The supervisor had studied burial the way most men study a trade. But then the detective found something new. A symbol. A circle crossed with a single vertical line, drawn next to 8 names. 8 X's on the map. 8 sites radar had detected. But next to one name, the missing driver, there was no symbol. Only a blank space. A void. The detective leaned back slowly. The driver wasn't in the grid. The supervisor hadn't buried him with the others. Which meant the supervisor still knew exactly where the driver was. Which meant the detective had been correct all along. The supervisor didn't fear discovery of the old graves. He feared discovery of the new one. He flipped through more pages, scanning feverishly, until a strange entry stopped him cold. A list of dates. Not wages. Not shifts. Not construction deadlines. Disappearances. Women. Men. Ages varied. Backgrounds varied. Most never reported. Some reported but closed quickly for lack of evidence. Dates spanning 2 decades. Not consecutive, but opportunistic. Chosen. And the final date on the list was highlighted in a thick black line. The same night the missing driver vanished. The same night the car was staged. The same night the deputy saw the fleeing truck. But next to that date, the supervisor had scribbled something else. He stayed awake too long. The detective exhaled shakily. He imagined the driver behind the wheel, exhausted but alert, unaware he'd been marked, unaware he had become prey in a ritual that had cycled for years. How close had he come to escaping? What had he seen? What had he understood in his final seconds? The detective closed the box and turned off the lights. The room dimmed to a soft blue glow from the hallway. His mind churned with the weight of the discoveries. He needed clarity. He needed to retrace the supervisor's steps, literally. He returned to the forest in the early morning hours, before even the sun had woken, his flashlight slicing through the darkness in narrow cones. He followed his footsteps back to the stone slab, the marks on trees, the clearing where he'd seen the silhouette. Every place felt different in the pre-dawn quiet, closer, more claustrophobic, as if the forest itself had tightened around its secrets overnight. At the slab, he knelt again. A thin film of condensation shimmered across its surface. His reflection stared back faintly, blurred, distorted. He placed both hands on the edges, feeling the cold seep into his bones. "Ask where I am." The detective whispered the words under his breath, letting them sink into the earth beneath him. Where was the supervisor? Not here. Not in the drum field. Not in the overturned soil. Not in the clearing. Not always in the woods. Where? He stood suddenly, flashlight beam trembling across roots and stones. He tilted his head, listening. For the first time, he heard something he had never bothered noticing, the distant roar of highway traffic. Not faint. Not far. Loud enough that vibrations reached the ground beneath his boots. He turned. The sound didn't come from the section of highway he'd always assumed. It came from the opposite direction, behind a slope of earth and brush he had never fully explored because it had looked unremarkable. He stepped toward it slowly. A steep incline rose ahead, thick with tangled undergrowth. To most people, it was too overgrown to consider crossing. Too wild. Too steep. But for someone who lived in the forest, someone who spent decades shaping its paths, someone who buried victims in a deliberate grid, it was a perfect blind spot. The detective climbed, pushing aside branches, dirt crumbling beneath his boots. When he reached the top of the incline, he froze. Below him, concealed from the road by the curve of land, lay something that made his pulse spike violently. A shack. Wooden. Weathered. Rotting. Roof sagging. Windows smashed out. Hidden so perfectly behind the incline that no driver, no hiker, no casual investigator would ever see it unless they stood exactly where he now stood. He descended toward it, each step careful, calculated. His flashlight beam landed on deep gouges around the doorframe, those same vertical marks he'd seen earlier on trees. The shack door was slightly open. He pushed it with the tip of his boot. The hinges wailed like something dying. Inside was darkness so complete it felt physical. He stepped in, gun raised, flashlight sweeping the interior. A bed frame. A rusted chair. A table covered in scraps of paper. A metal jug. And, in the far corner, something that made his breath stop. A wall covered in photographs. Pinned, taped, nailed. Some faded. Some crisp. Some printed recently. Faces. Victims. Workers. Drivers. Strangers. And his own. The detective staggered back, pulse exploding in his ears. His police photo, cropped, zoomed, printed on cheap paper, hung dead center of the wall. Below it, handwritten in the same calm script that filled the notebook. He sees what others don't. The detective's stomach twisted violently. He swept the flashlight across the table. More maps. More